Thank you. Now I'd like to welcome to the stage the very Reverend Dr. Owen Thompson, the Reverend Dr. Russell Levinson, and Professor Samuel Perry.
Thank you. I'm getting older, and it helped me when I got up here to see.
I just got a doctorate. Well, thank you all for having us, and thank you, Sam, and thank you, Russ, for being a part of this conversation. And one of the things that we wanted to kind of start this off with was asking the question of why we are here. I'll go into mine in more detail, but I'll just say at the outset that I'm here because I'd like another more healthy way to have a conversation with a Christian nationalist that doesn't result in injury. So why are we here?
First, I want to thank you for inviting me. And Joe, thank you for the important work that you do. I have met so many folks in the last couple of days, and it's been a joy to reconnect with people I know and have served with in other places. And the work that Joe is doing and that you're doing together is really important. And staying connected in this way is important. So thank you for the variety of voices. I'm here because Joe asked me to be here. I am, and I don't like to say no to him, except when he asks for money. And then, but we are living in just this, as the three of us were just talking about, this very bizarre cultural time. And where things in many places continue to get polarized more and more. And we hear the language and the verbiage continue to be the kind of experience that I don't think any of us, even 20 years ago, thought would be where we were in the year 2024. It's deeply troubling. It's painful. And I'm a Christian who loves our Lord, and I think he has an answer to that problem. And so as I was just sharing, I think there is an answer, and I think I'm pretty simplistic. I think the answers are more simple than complex, but I'll stop there.
Yeah, so I'm so grateful for the opportunity to be able to speak with you all, and just grateful to be here. It is a privilege of my life to be able to share what I do with other people, and I can't think of a more strategic group of people to share this kind of information with. I come to this subject as somebody who is not only a social scientist but a Christian, and I care deeply about what goes by the name Christian in the United States, like what I'm going to leave today, and I'll fly back to Norman, Oklahoma, and I will drive an hour and a half to a farm in Thomas, Oklahoma, where I will lead a men's retreat there for my church. And the topic of that discussion, where I'm going to be leading this Bible study with a group of men, is our reputation in the world. What does that look like? What does the Bible say about how the world ought to perceive what Christians do and who we are? And so I think these conversations are really important. My witness matters to me. The witness of the church matters to me. And I think the kind of data that we've been gathering, the kind of information that we've been collecting, the way we've been interpreting what's going on in the country, and what is flying by the name Christian is deeply troubling, and I think has implications for what we're seeing in the years ahead. And I would like to share the time with these guys to be able to have conversations about that, what that means, and how we can respond to that as Christians who are concerned about this as well.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm here because I'm the follower, as we are, of a Palestinian Jew named Jesus, whose message has been co-opted, corrupted, distorted, and I'm also here because, and I want to take it back, so to speak. I don't want to use that phrase, taking America back for God and such. But I also am here because I'm a student of yours. I really have heard your clarion call, your prophetic call to awake to this pressing issue, to this threat to our democracy, to the church, to the citizenry, particularly those of color, of LGBTQ community and the like. And so I'm here because I really want to learn more of how I can utilize the platform which I've been blessed with, and how we can to counter that message that has been co-opted, that is dominating the landscape as far as who God is and God isn't. So I'm just here to learn more and join in the revolution, so to speak. So Sam, they asked us just to have a conversation. So, what really got you into taking on this issue, and what drives you in this moment? And yeah.
So back in 2016, like many of you, I actually I went to bed early that night, November 8th, 2016, and all the polls said Hillary was going to win in a landslide, and I wasn't feeling that great that night, and I went to sleep, and I woke up, and Trump was the president, and I immediately read headlines that day, and headline after headline after headline said, 81% of white evangelicals, 4 out of 5 white evangelicals put Donald Trump in the White House. Based on some things that we had been researching at the time, I thought that was curious because this narrative of the certain group of people, that it was one tribe of Christian, one certain variety that elected Donald Trump, and that was responsible for what we were going to face and still face today. Well, we started to get into this data. We had collected all kinds of survey data about this phenomenon that we were exploring called Christian nationalism, and we found, and this is something that I'm happy that I think we're a part of. We found that whether or not you were a white evangelical really didn't matter a whole lot for electing Trump once we accounted for this ideology that basically said that America has this kind of special sacred relationship with Christianity, and not just Christianity, but a certain kind of Christianity. You might call it a kind of a traditionalist Anglo-Protestant, similar to white evangelical Christianity, that was the foundation of our nation, and that should be institutionalized formally and privileged and given supremacy in a certain way. And that ideology, if you felt like that had been taken away from you, that was under threat, and Donald Trump had promised that he would give that back, that was actually the predictor across not only evangelicals, but white Catholics, across mainline Protestants. In other words, it wasn't about being from a particular denominational group. It was about this fundamental ideology that seemed to be mobilizing people to line up behind a leader who said, this has been taken from you and I will give it back to you. And so we felt like this was important to explore further. And as we dug further into this phenomenon that we called Christian nationalism, and there are all kinds of, I would love to at some point talk about how we measure these kinds of things and how we distinguish between people who are really far on one spectrum and kind of in the middle and all those things. But after we dug further into this phenomenon, we found that this was actually something that in the book, Taking America Back for God, we really didn't dig into this enough, and what we tried to do in The Flag and the Cross, a subsequent book, was really talk about how this was a phenomenon that is primarily localized among white Americans. When we did our survey analysis and we started to dig a little further into how white Americans in particular respond to these kinds of views, this idea that the government ought to declare us a Christian nation, that we should take dominion over the nations, that Christians have a responsibility to take dominion, that the Bible should be the foundation, that Christian values should be the law of the land, all those kinds of things. We found that when white Americans affirm those kinds of views, they mean something completely different than when people of color affirm those kinds of views. When people of color affirm those kinds of views, and I'd show you, we still to this day find this every time we look at it, and I publish study after study after study that shows this. Oftentimes, people of color, when they affirm those same kinds of views, they have in mind something aspirational, right? Like this idea that America should have lived up to these values all along. Oftentimes, they are more progressive, in fact. I was just looking at a study this week, in fact, and we're publishing this, that we found that when people agree with Christian nationalist views, on the whole, especially white Americans, they're more likely to exchange equality for liberty. Right? Like if we gave them a choice, they're more likely to say, no, I want liberty rather than equality. And that's kind of libertarianism, that's white Christian libertarianism, that's kind of like liberty for us, and equality that we don't want to give. But we find that black women, when they affirm those same views, they are off the charts in terms of equality. They say, I want equality, right? Because a Christian nation to that group of people means, I want a nation that includes me finally, right? Like that includes me as a part of this civil process. So to get back to the original question, what has motivated me to get into this now is understanding that this thing that we see going on, these claims about Christianity under attack, which Trump has said like consistently within the last couple of months. I got back in the White House. He said this in December. If I get back in the White House, I'm bringing power back to Christianity. Christianity under Joe Biden has been persecuted. and Christians of all kinds have been persecuted. This idea that there is this kind of religious persecution and carnage, this kind of rhetoric. It is not only religious, but it is deeply racialized, and it is something that means more than religion. It is something that means people like us, our kind of values. It doesn't just reflect theological commitments, but it reflects a commitments to a certain kind of Anglo-Protestant ethno-traditionalism that is reinforced by a kind of an appeal or an attraction to authoritarian means of social control, and we see this in study after study. And so I am here to want to have conversations with people about how we get the word out and how we have productive conversations about this thing that I feel like is staring us in the face and is something that is not just could happen, but is promised to happen by the person who is promising to get back in office. But that has to take place not only within a context where we're just kind of raising the awareness among one another, who are probably at the choir in that sense, but also people who would be open to understanding and hearing more about, okay, why is this a problem? Why is this a danger?
Okay, so now let me say why I'm here. Now that you've opened that up a little bit. I'm Russell Levinson. I am the grandson of a great grandson of a Jewish man whose father came to the States, escaping the pogroms in Russia. Was a successful businessman, and I grew up in Birmingham, Alabama. When I say that, people go, I often get a moan, you grew up in Birmingham. Birmingham's not the same Birmingham it was that I grew up in, for the record. But one of the fascinating things is my grandfather and my father ran a very large department store in Birmingham. And you all know what happened in Birmingham in the 60s. And my grandfather, because he was Jewish, Levinson means son of a Levi, which means if the ark were here, I could touch it, you couldn't. You've seen the movie, you know how it turns out. But my grandfather's modus operandi was people are people, and we're going to welcome everybody who comes into this store. So when there were lunch counter sit-ins, and Bull Connor was right down the street with his fire hoses, and you can pull up my grandfather's store, Tillman Levinson, and look at pictures from the 60s of the big sales and people of every color in my grandfather's store. But I grew up in an area that was very segregated, Mountain Brook, Alabama, if anybody knows that area, and which wasn't apparent to me. And when you don't have people of color to pick on, you pick on people who have Jewish names. So I got some of that. It wasn't scarring, but I grew up in a high school where I was told to go sit with my Jew friends and eat with the Jews, because you're a Jew, you're not a Christian. And I was a Christian, for the record. But I will say this. I mean, you just said preaching to the choir. I mean, who in this room is for racism? No, I don't think nobody's going to raise their hand in this room. And I want to take something back. And we talked about, we had a Zoom conference, and I said, I'm an evangelical. I happen to be white. I'm not the white evangelical that the press talks about. And I have a lot of friends in the press, and when I hear that, it just irritates me. And I say, I want to take that back. I want to take ownership of that word back, because John Newton and William Wilberforce were evangelicals who helped do away with slavery. Charles Wesley, were evangelicals who were on the front end of public education and reaching out to the poor. We might have lost that battle, you know? I mean, the word's there, and it's in the news all the time. So, and you scientist people, you use it a lot. But it's not getting better. It's getting worse. And we're getting more entrenched, and we're getting more divided, and we're getting more into different camps. That's right. And I do not think the answer is going to be in who we elect. I really don't. I wear this I'm not a politician. I never preach politics. And I know that's quite popular in our denomination. I don't. My preaching is geared toward changing people's hearts by introducing them to the one who changes hearts. I love and study the sermons of Martin Luther King Jr., and I love his phrase that the only light will drive out darkness, only love will drive out hate. That's the answer. And I'm simplistic, probably too much for my own good. But our doctrine, our baptismal covenant says we respect the dignity of every human being. And so, I can keep pointing my folks to the news. I started telling my people, don't watch the news anymore. Stop watching the news and start loving people, because that's what we're called to do. I know that seems simple, but it's very hard to do if you're really serious about it. But that's what we preach at my place down the street from here. And the interesting thing is, I'm a little tired of this too. What I'd also like to take back is the work of evangelism, which is growing disciples for Jesus Christ. We've experienced a 20% growth down the street in the last 15 years. We don't talk about politics. We do talk about changing people's hearts. We do stay engaged in the community. We do stay in touch with our color has changed. Our economics have changed. The way in which people reach out in the community have changed. And I think that's the work of those of us who wear this. Now, I know not everybody's, you're doing important work, but those of us who get up in a pulpit week after week and encounter people all the time, we can keep talking about what's bad. I'm an optimist. I just told these two guys, I'm an optimist. And I believe in the gospel. I believe the gospel can change people's hearts. And I believe if we preach the gospel, it will change people's hearts. But if we keep saying, go back to the news, watch the news, be against Trump, if all we're going to do is, and I'm as stymied as anybody about how all that has happened. But I'll say this, and they've got a timer. I'm so glad they don't have this on me on Sunday.
I can't stop looking at it.
Yeah, I know, it's really there. So we had John Meacham come a few years ago, and I invited all the clergy in town. Genevieve, did you come? Were you there? Did you come? And you all know John Meacham, a faithful Episcopalian, a wonderful Christian man. And John, so I had as many clergy come as I could, and I said, I want you to talk about what's going on right now, because this was right after election. And John said, to be honest with you, most of the time I vote conservative. And I said, most of the time. And so things have changed. He said, but what we've done and what we're doing is incentivizing this behavior. We're rewarding this behavior across the board, people treating each other without dignity. And so we're just driving further and further apart. And he said, and the answer to that is to stop rewarding it. And he said, and you know whose job that is? And then he went, yours. And he pointed to the clergy. One of my new friends, much longer story, is Denzel Washington. And we've talked on the phone twice in the last week. And we're working on a little writing project together. And I love his faith journey. You might not like his movies, but I love his faith journey. And I love his movies, frankly. But he gets up in the morning, he reads his Bible, he says his prayers, he tries to help others a lot, if you know him, and he loves other people. And he just said to me the other day, I don't really, and a lot of people in that world don't want you to know that they're believers because it hurts their career. He said, I don't care anymore. He said, I'm not on my way up, I'm on my way out. And he said, I want to get ready for where I'm going. And that's what we got to be kingdom people who remind people what the kingdom is about. So I'm reminding people, taking back our message. And the Episcopal Church ought to be exploding because we are the one that does really welcome everybody. I'm more conservative. I'm more evangelical, whatever that means, but doesn't mean what you're talking about. Sure. We're the one. I gave a sermon a few weeks ago for a guy who's dying, and in the sermon we talked about drinking, dancing, smoking. So I said, "Welcome to the Episcopal Church," and there were a lot of Baptists in the crowd, so it was a wonderful evangelical moment right there. But we, like Michael Curry says, we're a church of Republicans and Democrats, and he gets kind of giggled at when he says that. But we're that, and we're conservative, and we're liberal. And we're those who understand marriage in one way and those who understand it in another way. we should be exploding. But if we keep putting up our hands against people because of who they vote for or what they're about or what they believe, we need to incentivize godly, dignified, loving behavior to everyone. And our churches will be exploding.
Yeah, but one of the
I want to take it back.
Yeah, but one of the great
Take it
challenges
back.
that I find in that, and we talked a little bit about this earlier, Sam, is that how do you pierce the cult, the veil of the cult, or the armor of the cult, when you can't have rational discussions, where people are so entrenched and indoctrinated in a certain mindset. It's hard to engage when the response is usually met with vitriol and accusations and so on. I attended a function not long ago in Cincinnati with Aubrey Hendrickson in his book, Christians Against Christianity. And the way he's phrasing this issue that we're facing is within, it's a spiritual thing. And I could not help in looking at the images that still haunt me of January 6th, the juxtaposition of the flag with Dixie flags and Confederate flags rather, and then some swastikas thrown in there and some language around denial of the Holocaust, that there's something truly evil and insidious. And I'm not saying about the individual, because I don't want to get into that they're evil, we're good, which the language is being used to justify violence and the like. But I couldn't help but juxtapose that imagery with the images of good Christian folk back in the time of Jim Crow and before, who would lynch someone who looked like me, male or female, on Saturday and then go to church on Sunday. Right. So part of that spirit is at work here. And there is something that you can almost pull from Revelations and say, something's happening here that just is hitting the soul. And it was Christopher Hedges who said, we're a nation that's addicted to hope. And so my question I want to ask you is what gives you hope in the midst of this? Because I'm not so sure. Because I talked to John Meacham when he was at the Dean's Conference last year, and I said, John, are we headed for a civil war? And he said nothing in the dynamics of red and blue, gray and blue, but certainly, regardless of winner or loser, we're going to see extremist acts of violence, the likes we've seen with Dylan Roof and on January 6th, and then Oklahoma City bombing, of course. And so that, to me, keeps me up at night as a priest, as a citizen, as a father. So I want to know, someone who's in this, are there glimmers of hope that we can latch on to that will allow us to enter into the breach with that message of hope amid so much despair?
Yeah. So I want to say I agree with your point about preaching the gospel, about dealing with people as human beings. I think that's really important. I want to comment on what politics is in a second, because I think I have a different view of politics and how we can do politics in a better way. Because I don't think politics has to be a bad thing. It shouldn't be. But I think we have a situation in which there's heart transformation that is needed, and yet at the same time, you talked about incentives. We have a political machinery and a media machinery that actually incentivizes that kind of siloing and polarization and vitriol. Within the last few years, it has gotten worse and worse as Americans have sorted. So when we talk about polarization, usually in my students, if I talk to them and they say Americans are polarized, usually what they have in mind is like people are going to extremes and there's nobody in the middle. That's not really what's happened. Most Americans are kind of in this moderate area where they have lots of views about a lot of things, right? They're not, you don't have a lot of extreme Democrats, extreme Republicans, extreme left-wing, right-wing. They're the loudest ones, and so it seems like they're everywhere, but most Americans are kind of in this middle. What has happened, though, is that we have sorted politically, and what that means is our various social identities, especially our religious identities, are now subordinating underneath our political and ideological identities. And so the kind of politics you're into now determines the kind of religious vibe you're looking for, right, in church. And you guys have experienced this, right? Like where people leave your church or come to your church because, maybe not because of the theology, but because these are my kind of people. They preach this way or they preach that way, and it oftentimes comes down to cultural or political messaging. At least that's the way it goes in my evangelical circles in Oklahoma. 2020 was this phenomenal sorting where you were too woke or not woke enough, right? Like you spoke out against this and not against this, and so people just left this and went to that. So we have a situation in which the political, cultural, media machinery incentivizes these kinds of, our inability to meet together, to have conversations, and it actually now requires effort. It is not the kind of thing that just happens if we follow this. It's like a stream that is carrying us to further and further isolation and sorting. And so this is where I think my idea of politics is a little bit different. If I recommend books all the time. A great book by a professor at Tufts named Eitan Hirsch called Politics is for Power. And what he's arguing in this book, and I use this with my students, usually when we talk about politics and I ask them, are they political, almost none of my students say yes. Because when I ask them why, they don't want to be jerks. They don't feel like they're experts enough. They don't feel like they're not into like being angry all the time. And I'm not into that either. I don't want to be that kind of thing. And what Eitan Hirsch is trying to argue is that that's not real politics. Now we've got in our mind what politics is. If you're into politics, that means you're into doom scrolling on social media for 2 hours every day, maybe getting into some kind of Twitter fight, and then reading on some just really, really lousy news, and you just did politics for the day, right? That's not politics. If that was politics, that'd be horrible. Who would want to be in that kind of politics? That's an interesting person who is a part of that, and that's politics now. But what real politics is meeting with people. It is what is politics is getting involved in embodied politics. It is meeting your neighbors. It is going door to door. It is being a part of the political machinery, not in a way that you make it an idol, and not in a way that you say it is the most important thing in my life, and all of the future hangs in the balance on whether or not this thing happens, but because you see humans as human beings, and you are forced to have conversations with people who may differ from you, and you're able to share and say, that's interesting, I disagree with you on that, but tell me about that, right? Like, tell me about that. We have to intentionally meet each other in these spaces where we wouldn't, because it has to be intentional now. So this is the way that I do that, and I'm serious about this. I really want to be somebody who walks the walk on this. I talked about the church that I go to, so I'm speaking at this men's retreat tomorrow morning, and I'm a part of a loosely affiliated Southern Baptist church in Norman, Oklahoma, and if you follow me on Twitter, you might think that's kind of funny, based on the kinds of things that I share, the information that I share. And when I say I'm involved, I'm not just involved. My wife and I lead in a community group at this church, and I lead a men's Bible study on Tuesday. And like I said, I'm speaking at the men's retreat this weekend. I'm one of those, right? Like I am involved in that community. And I don't know if any of those people there think the same thing that I do politically. I bet the majority voted Trump twice, right? Like, and yet. Those people know that I love them, and they love me. And when my wife got sick with cancer, they came and gave us food and helped out. And when they got sick with cancer, we gave them food and helped out, right? And we've given cars, and we've gotten these things. And so we are. That is politics too, right? Like that's not only the community; it's the body of Christ, where we are meeting with one another and hopefully being a light to the world, right? Like hopefully being a witness in the way that we serve one another. But it is also politics in that I am able to have productive conversations with people who may differ from me in a space that is non-threatening, and it's not just fights all the time. You know what I'm saying? And so that can be the gospel too, right? And hopefully it's the gospel in the way that not only are the conversations edifying and productive, but I would also like to see productive policy change come out of that kind of thing. Oklahoma politics is a mess. It's overrun with the worst kind of reactionary politics, in my opinion, in the nation. It's up there.
Oh, we don't have any problems in Texas.
Well, so like I know I'm speaking again to the choir here, who's experienced that kind of thing, but I would I can't lie. I would like to see productive policy change in Oklahoma too, but not at the expense of ripping the church apart or smearing our witnesses as if that was the only thing that mattered anymore.
Yeah, because you're asking for hope, and I'll be honest. I just said I don't preach on politics. I think if I got up in the pulpit after January 6th and didn't say something, I would have been negligent in my duties. So I absolutely called that out. Horrible, horrible day for America. Haunting day. And I have been on Fox News and I've been on CNN. And I've written op-eds for Fox News, and I've written one for CNN on the moral depravity of Donald Trump. And in the church in which I sat, I thought, well, I did it while I was on vacation. And I wondered if there were going to be boxes outside my office when I got back. We have 10,000 some odd members, and that op-ed had about 1 million hits in a week. And And I thought, wonder how it's going to go over. I had 2 negative remarks in my church and jillions of thank you, because I'm right where you are. I've always been a GOPer, but I can't But so we got lots of callers in here, and we all preach. And think of the influence we do have week after week to preach hopeful messages. Do you know the name Aaron Alex Oakworth, I think is his name. Okay. Akron. Do you know his name? It's, all right, and you'll confirm. Richard Spencer, who's the white supremacist, has said he's backed off of that. I don't know if you can attest to that. I don't know.
I've heard that.
So he said big white supremacists used to do these horrible rallies, neo-Nazi rallies, and so he's doing one in Tallahassee in October of 2018. And on the campus in Tallahassee, on the campus of University of Florida. And so Aaron is an African-American guy who teaches in a middle school, and he got up to go protest that day. Daddy was a bishop. Great story. And he said, I'm going after him. So the big group was going down to protest, and read the story, look it up, and you can find it. And somehow or another, God put the 2 of them right up in each other's face. And people have been punching Richard Spence, rightly so, probably. And this is back in 2018. And he turns around, and so Aaron is in his face. And Aaron goes, "Why do you hate me, man?" And Richard Spence tries to turn away. He goes, No, I want to know, why do you hate? Is it the color of my skin? Is it my dreadlocks? Is it where I'm from? Is it the way I dress? Why do you hate me? He kept trying to turn away, and he said he heard within him the voice of God say, "Give this man a hug." And he said, "Okay." And he said, and he started to reach up. The guy kind of pushed back, and he looked at him and he said, "Why do you hate me?" And evidently, Richard Spencer said, "I don't know." And then they hugged each other. And then they walked off together and took selfies and posted on. Now, it took Spencer a while to come around, but what Aaron said was, later that day, he heard our Lord's voice in his heart say, "You changed this man's life." And that's what we have the opportunity to do every week by telling those kinds of stories. Right. The only way to change those people's hearts is what you're doing. But I think you're exactly right. It's those kinds of conversations, honest, that's not Christian behavior. Yeah. This is Christian behavior. That's not Christian behavior. But do it in a way that's dignified and loving and respectful. Right. Yeah.
And I agree wholeheartedly. But I think one of the reasons why, in part, that we are here, and that the evangelical Christian right, more the extremist right, has dominated the landscape and the narrative to the point where Jesus has been, lampooned and holding an AR-15 and, all those things, is because of our collective silence. Mm-hmm. Someone told me from another denomination that you guys are the most introverted denomination on the planet. And whether we're introverted personally, ideogram 7-4, whatever it is, the reality is it's our time to herald that news, that good news, both inside the pulpit and beyond the pulpit, to get on the news such as you have. And as Canon Speller said the other day, we can't leave it up to Bishop Curry to be the mouthpiece. And one of the things I've often complained about, and it's gotten better in these settings, is that here we are in this setting, safe space, so to speak, and we're all wearing our name badges. But I often count the number of people I say hello to, and they don't respond. And so if we can't say hello to each other in this space with these badges, identifying us as brothers and sisters in Christ, fellow disciples, how are we going to herald the good news and counter the narrative if we are not getting beyond our discomfort?
That's exactly right.
That's
exactly right.
So I want to ask you, Sam, based on and I think Andrew Whitehead also argues, that this is a threat to the church. In what ways do you see Christian nationalism as a threat to the church? I have my own ideas, but I'd like to hear what you might. We know how it is for the democracy,
sure,
especially if Project 25 gets enacted. Yeah, that's another.
Before you say that, let me say something that I feel deeply convicted about, because my daughter lives in Mississippi, and I'm in a pretty insulated community because I think I love being at the church where I am, and I see the gospel at work, and I'm at the gym, I'm at home, I'm at the grocery, and I'm at church. Yeah. So I'm doing our community stuff. So we're moving with one force. So I told my daughter, who lives in rural Mississippi just a little while ago, And we talked an hour and a half ago what I was coming to do. And I said, so is it, what's it like there? She said, oh, Dad, the Klan is alive and well in this town. And so she said, yeah, now I don't see it down here at St. Martin's, but I know it's alive. It's alive and well in parts of Texas. So it's real and scary, but you're exactly right. So sorry.
No, it's okay.
Yeah.
So I think one of the unfortunate consequences, there's really two unfortunate consequences that come to mind. I'm sure there's a lot of them, but two that come to mind, the unfortunate consequences of just the prominence of Christian nationalists, let's just say rhetoric, right? Like Christian nationalist kind of sentiment and rhetoric. One of them is, and this is actually one of the, I think, most consistent findings of the last 2 decades in the social sciences on religion, because of that phenomenon that I talked about a little while ago that we are sorting politically. What we find is a lot of what is driving young people away from wanting to affiliate with religious communities is the association of Christianity with the Christian far right. And so we see this not only in surveys where we follow people over time. Those are called panel surveys, where we actually see people change decisions and change affiliations. We actually have seen it experimentally as well. Political scientist David Campbell at Notre Dame, what they did was they took a bunch of young people and they asked them what religion they are. They affiliated with some kind of religious group. And then they showed this group of young people a couple of different advertisements, an advertisement for a politician that was using Christian nationalist rhetoric and something else as a control. And they showed another one, a member of the clergy who identified with politics in some kind of right-wing way, and another member of the clergy who didn't do that kind of thing. And they found that the young people who were actually exposed to that Christian nationalist message actually changed their religious affiliation to nothing, right? Like they literally de-affiliated because they said to themselves, if that is what it means to be a Christian, then I am not that, right? And so this is something that is actually, we are shooting ourselves in the foot as a community by allowing that to dominate the narrative of what a Christian is and looks like, so that when young people see that, they say, no thanks, count me out of that, right? But the flip side of that is who is actually now identifying as a Christian has changed. So Ryan Burge, who's a great follow on Twitter, he's a political scientist, does lots of beautiful graphs and data. Has been published in the New York Times. He's really good and nonpartisan. He's really great at what he does. What he has shown and others have shown, Pew Research did a study on this as well. They're finding that the number of people who identify as white evangelicals has increased actually. And it's not because people are going to church, and it's not because people are reading the Bible. It's because of now what that means. That label means conservative, pro-religious Trump supporter. And so you can actually see that like Muslims are calling themselves evangelical. People who don't believe in God calling themselves evangelicals. People who don't go to church calling themselves. Why? Well, because that's what it means now. So we are. The actual category, I think, of Christian is being hollowed out to mean something almost completely political, to where young people no longer want to be a part of it, and the people who do want to be a part of it are just in it for political reasons. And so I think this is actually, this is one of the reasons why I say like this has to be a call for Christians to participate in.
Yes.
Right? It can't just be secular people saying like, oh, you guys are so wrong. Like, because they're going to take that and say, what do you know, right? Like, who are you to tell me about that? It has to be Christians who are committed to their own faith to say that's not what a Christian is. That is not the gospel. That is not true to what the Bible teaches about what Christ is people who follow Christ are supposed to be like. To not in an ugly way, again, like thoughtful conversations with human beings that are clear, crystal clear of what the gospel is and is not, so that we can actually, I think, communicate to a world that what you thought Christianity was on the basis of these loud voices, that's not it. It's something else.
So coming out of the introversion is important. I mean, that's an important message. So I'm put it back on you.
Sure.
Where do you see the needle moving? In a positive direction? Or do you? I mean, where's it hardest?
Well, I kind of was talking to Sam earlier. I kind of share Bryn Tanhill's, she's a trans activist, she was on a top podcast called Straight White American Jesus the other day, and I kind of share some of her alarm, because I as much as I have my faith and my hope in God, I struggle with that sometimes with God's people. And I do think that we are going to see, we're going to go through some hard times before we get there. And I hate to be the downing Debbie here, but there will be blood. There has been blood. So I'm trying to navigate that space, quite honestly, and hold on to my hope. And I understand that our role is going to, that this is the time for the church to be the church in the fullest sense. And all of us are going to have to enter into the breach. It's going to require that preaching and teaching and that holding that Ve Media as best as we can, because, again, regardless of who wins the election, it's some groups not going to go quietly into the good night, and others will be emboldened to act further. So for me, I want to speak the hard truth that it's going to be rough. There's going to be some turbulence, but we will get through this with God's help. And these are the birth pangs that we're living through. But yeah, it's tough, brother. Sometimes I wake up at night, this to me is more pressing and alarming than at this stage, at least, than climate change, because what's on the ballot in November is Christian nationalism. And I keep trying to convince my conservative colleagues and counterparts that, this is not your standard R versus D election. This is really, and it's not about good or evil, it's right and wrong. And kind of framing that and viewing that from the lens of the gospel of reconciliation, peace, justice, love, unity. And if it doesn't fit that, as Bishop Curry said, if it ain't about love, it ain't about God. And so I'm just really trying to have hard conversation with that congregation. And we've had forums on this topic, and I'm trying to form coalitions within our community, interfaith, interdenominational, so that we all can kind of get a plan. How can we together work to be repairers of the breach and to hold the line and to hold each other up? As we know, there's a reason Jesus sent disciples out in pairs, And so I would come to you, man, help me, brother, I'm going through this. Help me find my way, because I'm just in this state of great despair. Not so much for myself, but for my kids, my boys, 14 and 17. So I'm just in that place. But your books have been, in many ways, scriptural for me. About this topic and prophetic in many ways. One of the questions I guess I wanted to ask you, Russ, too, I just went out of my brain. It'll come back.
I'm Russ, if you need.
Russ, thank you. Yeah, so ad lib.
Well, let me say, I will say that I think, and this is George Floyd, which blew everything, our Houstonian George Floyd. And I knew as a large white suburban church that is changing in color, but I said, I gotta reach out to my friend Victor Thomas, who's the largest African-American Episcopal church in town. So I called Victor and we sat down, and he said, Victor's a good friend now, and he said, yeah, every time this happens, you guys call. He said, and you want to talk about what do we do now, and how can we help you, and what program can we put on, and we need to do, and he said, let's not do that. Can we just do stuff together more? Yeah. And he said, let's just find a way we have this clinic. He said, bring your folks over and let's work at my clinic for a day. And we have a Veterans Day service, and Victor's a veteran, so I had him come and be a speaker. And so he said, let's show people that this is actually possible. Now, I know that's pretty vanilla, pretty generic, but I mean, those of us, as you just said, we've got to partner up, and we've got to speak clearly. And when you said this fall isn't about good and evil, it might very well be about good and evil, I think. And but the challenge for me, and where I don't want to go down the rabbit hole of pessimism just because of who I am, but the president's speech last night, I think all of y'all were socializing and stuff, and I went back and watched the speech, and one of the great lines from the speech last night is, you don't stop loving your country when you lose. You keep loving your country even if you lose. Right. Yeah. And I thought, I knew we were going to sit here today. I thought, I can't stop sharing this message because I feel like I'm in a losing battle sometimes. I can't, and I can't stop loving the sheep, even if I don't look like them or feel like the way they do or vote the way they do. The primary modus operandi is finding a way, as you just said, to have those engaging encounters that are loving. You're going to run up against the nutballs,
Right.
and you're just going to have to. Jesus said you could walk away from some of them. So,
Yeah.
and dust your, and I've done that. I mean, okay. But those, and there are a lot of partnerships.
Yeah.
I was fascinated after I wrote this CNN bit, which you don't get paid for the record. And maybe you do, but
Nope.
I had a longtime member in his 70s, lifelong GOP, member of the GOP, and here came the email, and I thought, well, here we go. And he said, I don't think you went near far enough. And he said, I think we are in a time when he said, this man who shall remain nameless, Voldemort is kind of the way I put it, but who shall not be named. He said, I think he's the most anti-Christ political figure I've seen in my lifetime. And he said, if it's down to these two, as a lifelong Republican, I'm voting for Biden because the Band-Aid has to come off and people have to see how deep this infection is. Yeah. And I said, you need to write an op-ed because he's a big business oil guy here in town. Excuse me, we do count on oil in Houston. I know not everybody likes that, but I said, if you wrote an op-ed, but we do need to say where the line is drawn. I mean, that's it. Right.
Yeah.
The line, this is evil.
Yeah.
These things are evil. These things are wrong. These things are not Christian. As you said, that's not what Christianity is about. And what it is about is we got a bigger message, and it's respect everybody.
Right.
Love it.
Well, and so, I think something that, our relationships change through these interpersonal conversations. I think this is important through preaching, through being able to address those kinds of things. But I would be remiss as a political scientist if I didn't acknowledge that oftentimes change comes from the top down. We hate hearing that as Americans because we love grassroots and we love individual autonomy and agency and all those kinds of things. But oftentimes, especially in politics, what we end up thinking and doing and feeling like is okay and normalized comes from the rhetoric of our politicians, right? The way that they speak to each other, the way that they relate to one another, has profound influence on the ways that we feel like, oh, this is how we're doing politics now. This is what flies. This is what we can expect from this. And when politicians ratchet up that rhetoric to mobilize the base, and that ends up scoring big for them at the polls, they will keep on going to that tactic, right? That is now a tool in their toolbox to mobilize people to action. And so I actually do think, as important as it is that we have these, this is what I'm committed to. I'm committed to doing things like this. I want to have conversations interpersonally with as many people as I possibly can. And yet some hope that I have is just like in 2022, that was a really bad midterm for election deniers and Christian nationalists. They did not seem to carry most of the elections that they tried. The more that happens, the more that is a failing strategy, and people, based on conversations, we've toned down the polarization, they actually are thinking about issues. The more that can happen, I really do think the less politicians are going to think, oh, that's a winning strategy. I'll just ratchet up the hate, I'll ratchet up the anger, and ratchet up the fear, so that I can mobilize as many angry people as possible to get to that. That's why polarization is a disaster. It is bad. It only helps people who benefit from gridlock. It only helps people who benefit from clicks and that kind of venom. And so I think one of the reasons why I feel like these kinds of interpersonal conversations and these kinds of redirecting of what it means to be a Christian and deep separating it from partisanship is because I want politicians to get the message that is not a winning strategy, that people want to hear about issues. People just want things to be fixed. They want government to go better and to be more effective in that kind of way. I hope we all do, right? And so I think that is also something I want to acknowledge, that this is I would also like in the communities that we develop and the kinds of results that I hope we can hope for, is that politics changes as a result. Yeah.
Well, Russ, it came back to me what I wanted to ask you, because Bishop Curry talked about not long ago preaching at a church, and I think it was on the Beatitudes or something of that nature, and he was accosted afterwards for, preaching that liberal stuff or something, and he had to make the point that these were not my words; these are the words of Jesus. Mm-hmm. And so part of the challenge for all of us, I would say, is that we need to bring back the potency of the radical love of God within the text itself, which people have dismissed as being, that doesn't count anymore, doesn't have, So I just think we really need to. But how do you do that when you're preaching the verbatim, the red stuff in Scripture, and people are coming back at you like if that you're taking a position on either right or mostly left. Mm-hmm. How have you
I'm
dealt
not
with that?
mostly left. Don't get and don't let that get back to my church. But no. But I think I'm a moderate. I'm a very moderate. But I mean, gosh, y'all. I was trained at Virginia Seminary where preaching was very important, and I think I've studied under some great preachers. Mm-hmm. And to have confidence in the Word, to believe the Word changes lives, to believe when you introduce people into the power of the living Lord Jesus, it will change their life. And I believe that. Mm-hmm. So that's what I preach for. Now, I'll do pastoral sermons, and after January 6th, I did that sermon. Or we're coming up Good Friday, better talk about the cross, and we're going to talk about Easter and all that stuff. But to believe it here, mm-hmm. in such a way that you're going to go out and proclaim it. And human nature loves a void. I mean, deplores a void. Human nature deplores a void. COVID, we all got isolated, so you didn't have people going, when you're at a dinner party and you say something crazy and somebody goes, it's kind of crazy. So no, you just stayed at your computer for 2 years. And the void that happened separated us, and we needed to do all that, but it did not allow us. The void got filled with hate.
Right.
Mm-hmm. And what we need to do is say that void, which we all know, we've all experienced, it's got to be filled not with hate, because hate's not going to get us anywhere but worse. Right. Love is going to get us forward. And Michael Curry's the man of the hour, but all of us should be preaching that message. Yeah. Mm-hmm. It just turned yellow. Okay. But it did a minute ago and then went back to black.
More time. They just keep giving us more time.
Give about 30 more minutes would be fine. No.
The final countdown. So Sam, what's the title of your next book?
So the next book is Religion for Realists: Why We All Need the Scientific Study of Religion. And what it is an argument for why social scientists who study religion can do that better, to generate more trust among people who read that kind of work. Mm-hmm. And hopefully to talk to my colleagues in the social sciences, because it is social scientists who tend to be a rather secular group, I guess told themselves a long time ago that religion will just go away if you ignore it. Mm-hmm. And lo and behold, it hasn't happened, and religion really means a whole lot and to things that matter to them too. And so I'm trying to convince my colleagues that religion ought to be something that you fund, hire for, seek out, because it's still really important. It probably isn't going away.
Thank you. And just maybe in our last 30 seconds, we have anything we want to share in closing with the entire family here, gathered here present?
I get asked about this a lot, and it's I did a funeral that was seen by a number of people of our 41st president, and for our 41st president, and a lot of people say, "What do you remember about that day?" And the Bushes became very good friends, and they were very dignified, wonderful. We do well to have them back, or somebody like him back. 41. And I'm just saying, he's the one I knew. I didn't know, I know 43, but not like 41. Love them all. And it was a big day, and there was some pressure there. But we're all lined up, and Michael Curry and I are about 10 spaces apart. And I had three things I remember from that day. Not who was there, not the great, there was some great music, all that stuff. One moment was getting in the pulpit and looking for my wife, which I normally try to do. And the first was Michael Curry saying, "Come here a minute, I want to pray for you." And I don't remember what he prayed. I remember how he ended. He made the sign of the cross on my head. And he said, "Now, just go preach the gospel." And then we got to the back and we're lining up. The other moment I remember is Marion Buddy, who's the Bishop of D.C. And again, I'm more conservative, and Marion, we know, is more progressive. There we were in the back, and we were getting our instructions about coming in. I turned around, and Marianne had both hands over my back with her eyes closed, praying for me. And I thought, that's the Episcopal Church. She's praying for me. We probably a lot of things we don't agree on, but she's praying for me. And she was praying the same thing Michael Curry is. So all of us with collars, do what Michael Curry says. Get out there and preach the gospel.
Thank you. Anything to add?
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I love that. That's a great note. I'd say I agree wholeheartedly. Preach the gospel. The gospel is both truth and the gospel is action. And so, like I hope we can be involved in both of those things.
Thank you. When I was a brooding teenager, even up until my early priesthood, when my father, for somebody who don't know, was a bishop, my bishop for a little while until he kicked me out of the diocese. Wisely so. When I would brood and all the weight of the world would be upon my shoulders, as I felt it, he would say, with his hand in my chest, Owen, what's the good news? And I'd grudgingly say, God loves me and God is in charge. He said, that's right. Now cut it out and get going. And so I hear those words, and I just, even in the most dire moments, to be reminded of that good news of God's love for all of us, God's love for the church, and the blessed assurance that God is in charge and that we are the good news. And so I just want to thank all of you, clergy, laity alike, for being the good news for each other, for entering into the breach together, for not giving up, particularly under the challenge that was COVID. And one last thing is that this is our moment. The church, as we know, was founded in crisis, is founded on the margins, but it's founded for this very reason and this very time which we're living. So I just pray that we'll all step up and be the body, hands, heart, presence, voice of God in Christ and his love. So thanks all for having us.
Thank you. Good word. Thank you.
Okay.